everyone, back with a hot tub transmission here in Lake Tahoe. And this is a complex and nuanced topic. And I think a really common one in relationships for those who are on the path. And so, people who self-identify as being personal development oriented or spiritually oriented. And there's a level of commitment to growth that when you're on the path, that entails. And I've talked about before in my other posts and lives that oftentimes we worry that our partner might not be as growth oriented or spiritually oriented as us, and that more often than not they are. It just looks different than our path. So just because they don't read the same books as us, just because they don't go to the workshops as us, just because they don't use the same language as us, doesn't mean that they are not also on the path of growth and spiritual development. It just looks different. And it takes a level of maturity and to get off of your spiritual superiority high horse through New Age narcissism I spoke to in my last video, to be able to witness someone and really see them. And sometimes we're afraid of what we're going to see, right? Like sometimes we are worried, we're freaking out that if we really see our partner, we might see that we are indeed outgrowing them. And I want to speak to that because in my experience of relationships in my personal life, in my marriage, and in my dating life, and witnessing marriages that are thriving. And I know, how you define thriving is kind of its own thing, that could be a separate dialogue, but that actually is part of what I'm talking about here. Like, how do you define thriving? What do you mean by outgrowing your partner? And I advocate that all relationships, you are guaranteed to outgrow your partner at a certain point, and actually many times. I believe in a leapfrogging is quite common, and actually one of the most beautiful things about marriage. So this, or long-term relationship for that matter. So if you are thinking like something's wrong because I'm outgrowing my partner, whatever that means, so we're going to circle back to that. I want you to know that first, the first thing to do is to relax and consider that this feeling of suspecting you're outgrowing your partner is normal, and it's actually part of the ecology that is long-term relationship. Like, long-term relationships support us in our growth. So if you think that your personal development path and your spiritual path are only in those workshops that you attend and the books that you read, and in your own personal excavation, of course, your personal way that you commune with your with nature and with the divine, and with noticing where your ego wants to run your life, and you're doing shadow work and all those things. So if you're noticing that, I lost my train of thought. Let me come back to it. Where was I? So if you're noticing that you are, that feeling of outgrowing your partner, right? And, oh man, I totally lost my train of thought. Kaboom. Let's just sit in nature for a little bit and see if it comes back to me. And meanwhile, you get to not hear my voice. You get to be with me in this space. Let me see if I can bring it back. Meanwhile, enjoy the trees and hear how they have messages for us. So I'm going to speak to what it means, what does outgrowing your partner mean, and how that's part of the natural container that is long-term relationship. That at certain points, we both outgrow each other, and then we call each other in. That's what happens, is we're like, hey, I'm experiencing this shift in my life, and I want, but I'm actually moving into the next level because that's what's being called through me. And then inviting your partner, hey, let's look and see what this next level of a relationship would look like. And this often begets the question about shared purpose. Because if you don't have at least a loose idea of your shared purpose in your relationship, then things can get really dicey when you're leapfrogging, right? Leapfrogging is where like one person's growing and then they invite the next person to leapfrog and grow with them. And the person can say yes or no. You know, and I know that people have panic around that question. Like, what if my partner says no? They might. More often than not, your partner is probably a yes. They're probably like, yeah, like I'm invested in this relationship. I invested in us. And they might, because they might not be on the path of spiritual and personal growth, they might not know exactly what that means. Like, what do you mean you want me to level up? Like, sure, but how do I do that? And they also might be defensive, like that they're not enough for you. And this is where the work is for us who are on the path, right? Because we can very easily demonize our partners, like basically say, yeah, you're not enough. You better up level and get your stuff together or I'm out of here. And that kind of ultimatum isn't love. And in fact, if you really look, there's codependency even in that, which is really ironic. Really, really ironic. Sometimes our high standards as people on the path actually have undertones of codependency because we are not willing to be in that limbo place. A conscious limbo, I want to say, not like the limbo where you're waiting and suffering and being dishonest. I'm talking about the conscious limbo of giving your partner space to rise to the occasion. And oftentimes it's not as fast as we want it to be, because if we're on the path, we like quantum leaps and we like growing exponentially and all this stuff. And we panic when our process is taking too long. Admit it. Admit it. You panic when you've been working on the same, whatever, money blocks, whatever blocks you've been looking at in your life. Yes. And this is just another way that this block is showing up. And you might be frustrated that you're still actually working on your codependency and like developing your own ability to be sovereign. You know, and it's one thing to be sovereign when you are just looking in your own life and the way you relate to money or your work or your food or like all these things like that are more just personal to you and your relationship to an other that's not a person. But it's a whole other level of sovereignty when you look at your relationship to not just any other thing, but another human being. Because then we're relating on a very complex dimension, right? Like multi-dimensions. And so the reason I share this is if you think you're outgrowing your partner, you probably are. And what that means is not what you think it means. You're actually outgrowing yourself more than it is your partner. And if it's really genuine, then the place that you invite your partner into that up level doesn't come from need or freak out or something's wrong here. And so if you are coming from need or freak out or something's wrong here when you're calling your partner up and into the next level, like there's something wrong with the relationship or there's something wrong with your partner, then you actually are right in the middle of your own up leveling, you're outgrowing yourself, but you're like in the middle of it and you're asking your partner to do this with you when you actually haven't really completed it yourself, if that makes sense. So just because you're so hyper aware that you notice like this urge to like, ooh, I'm being called into the next level, you start to freak out because there's a part of you that's terrified you're going to leave your partner behind, right? And part of that's natural, like no one really wants to lose someone they love. But part of that is codependence, because that's just such a big part of our culture, you know? And even if you're sovereign in so many other ways in your life, sovereignty in relationships like a whole other ballgame, because this also gets into safety, feeling safe. Can you feel safe in your own being no matter what, even when you're in that space of letting your partner rise to the occasion? What do you do in that space? Are you constantly like thinking, oh my gosh, they're not gonna be a yes, or they're taking too long, or like they are, yes, but their baby steps are not good enough, right? And all this attention starts to be on the other person, and like how they're not fast enough, or they're not doing it well enough, and like they should be able to do it as fast as you, and quantum leap as fast as you. And again, that's where the spiritual superiority comes in place. And then also is where you're avoiding your own growth. You're avoiding the places of where your own fear is, where your own codependency is, where you think the problem's out there. And it's not like a problem is in you, okay? I don't want to create that languaging or charge around it, but it's like the angsty feeling is actually in you. Where are you actually not creating the life that you love, and you blame it on your partner? Where are you actually like you do all this sovereignty work with these other areas of your life, and where are you still avoiding it? Where are your blind spots still? And particularly where are your blind spots in relationship? Because that's just where like so much reveals itself to you. So just to recap, as I finished up here, leapfrogging in your partnership is totally normal. And you might be always the person leapfrogging ahead and inviting your partner, and leapfrogging ahead and inviting your partner. And then sometimes your partner is going to leapfrog ahead and invite you in. And it might be more often you doing the leapfrogging and then inviting them in, and that's okay. That's okay. It's all, it's all growth, and it's all love. And so that was the last piece I wanted to speak to, is if you think love isn't enough, how do you define love? If you're talking about love, like, I'm not getting enough connection, where are you turning away from connection in your daily life? Like, if you're demanding all this connection from your partner, I'm more of an advocate for intimacy in relationships and passion first, and then connection is more of like the result of all that intimacy and passion. I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way, but most of us start with like, I need connection first, so that, well, especially women, we tend to be more like connection oriented. Not always, and there's a spectrum, but or sometimes we like rebel against connection and we become hyper individualistic, right? And then like, I don't need anybody, and then that also creates a lot of distance between you and not just another person, but you and the world, you and everything. So that's like its own topic, and that's less what I emphasize, because I'm guessing most of the people my audience is people who are personal growth and spiritually oriented. Therefore, they probably are more oriented towards connection, right? And so if you are trying to build connection first and like hammering like, what is our shared purpose? And like with this like freak out underneath it, like, if we don't have shared purpose, we're screwed, and like our relationship means nothing, and like all this stuff. Like, we can get so much, I don't want to go a tangent too much, but there's a lot of FOMO because we see like all these conscious relationships and how relationships should look, and like all these things. They're one example of relationship, and of course it looks like the most ideal, but I think it's missing out on like, are we here for the most ideal relationship, or are we here for relationship? And of course not abusive relationship, I'm not advocating that, but it's like, what is ideal? Like, we create it every day. And I don't know what everyone's soul's path is, right? Like, some people, I don't know how many times they've been around, and so maybe this time around they get the partner who's like exactly on the same plane, and they're like equally yoked and all these beautiful things. And if you feel like that's you, then you're not so much my audience, right? I'm speaking to the people who are like, I really love the partner that I'm with. They feel like a yes to me. And then there's all these like freakouts that I have about like, am I going to outgrow them? Is love enough, and all these things. And again, it comes back to, if by love you mean connection, which for most of us, that's what we really mean. We don't realize it. We think we're talking about love with a capital L, but we're really talking about like, I just want to feel connected. More than likely, you're not connected to something in your own world. There's something that you're resisting or avoiding. And we think that if we actually meet the thing that we're resisting, avoiding, and usually it's that nudge of like, I want the next level of something. It's usually just not in a relationship. It's like everywhere in our life, right? So again, you're probably in the middle of your growth, your leapfrog growth. This isn't the time to panic and invite your partner. This is the time to double down and go, really take care of yourself. And you don't have to close off your heart to your partner. I think that's the other tricky thing, is like, while we do all this doubling down, is like, but how do I not lose my partner? Like, how do I stay connected? And the thing is like, connection comes from intimacy and passion. And intimacy could like, and let me say that another way too, like sometimes intimacy doesn't feel like you're connecting, actually. So I don't want to say that like that necessarily. Like, intimacy doesn't always lead to connection. It can lead to what feels like disconnection. But disconnection's also a way back to connection. Do you see like the irony of it? Right? Like, this is what disconnection feels like between us. This is like, feels like when there's like a space between us, and like the space is widening. And can you be okay with that? I don't think people talk about it enough, that like relationships, long-term relationships, there are times where you have a big space and a widening gap, and you wonder like, what if this gap just keeps widening and we really do go separate ways? I mean, you might. But my question is, are you actually seeing your partner and how they are maybe showing up in ways that you didn't validate before? Like, they didn't count the ways that they showed up on their growth path and their spiritual path. Like, oh, they're not doing it like me, so like that doesn't count. Or like, where are other ways where you're discounting where connection is already available, or intimacy is available, or passion is available? And are you making your relationship wrong? Are you making your partner wrong? Are you making yourself wrong for that? Because like, it's part of the crucible of relationship. It's part of what has us grow. So I hope this is helpful. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to say. See if it comes up. Yes. So what do you do with yourself in the meantime when you have this widening feeling between the two of you, and you feel like you're leapfrogging ahead, and you're like, your partner's, I'm not sure if I can leapfrog and meet you there, or I can, but I don't know how, and they're going really slow. Like, the place where it's just not where you want it to be, and you get like angsty. That's your work. That's not like necessarily a sign like, oh, this is the wrong partner for me. This is like what relationship does. Can we be with the discomfort as someone says yes and then figures out their way to meet us? Because it really comes down to like, is that codependence showing up for you again? Are you actually feeling like, I can't be here, I'm freaking out because I need to know my partner's with me. I need to know that we're on the shared purpose every second. I need to feel seen by my partner every second. You know, like, can you be in the space where you don't feel seen by your partner? And then actually notice where they are seeing you. This is the trick, right? When we start to like relax and into like, okay, maybe my partner isn't seeing me. Like, maybe we are on widening paths, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's perfect for this relationship. Maybe that's how we're going to build more intimacy and more passion and more connection ultimately, and more shared purpose ultimately. The connection and shared purpose really comes as a result of being willing to be in the crucible of building intimacy and truth-telling and discomfort and being disconnected. Can you be with all of that without freaking out? And so how do you do that? I mean, that's what I teach my clients, is like, how do we be in the space between? And then there's times when you're not in the space between, right? Where your partner does meet you and surprise you, and they have like beautiful conversations with you, and like, you're like, oh my gosh, I love this moment, right? But then when you get attached to that moment, then you start the spiral of freak out again, and the codependency. It's like, how can you be really a champion for yourself and your partner? How can you love them as they are and as they're not? How can you love yourself as you are as you're not, without getting attached? And also, can you let your partner see you in this? You might hide this feeling of disconnection from them because you think they can't handle it. What if you shared it with them, not because, like, usually you probably share your disconnection like there's something wrong over there and they need to step up and like, whatever, be more intimate or up level or get their stuff together, whatever it is that you're like encouraging them to do. Yes, on one hand, we need to do that. And are you letting them see you? Or are you the one that always has to like kind of have it together for the relationship? Are you the one that always has it together, really, and like is a step ahead of your partner? Therefore, like, they can't handle me if I share my disconnection. Or again, you start to spiral, like, if I admit this feeling of oh, I feel disconnected and concerned, and some of my codependencies flying up, and I'm feeling like unsafe, my anxious attachment, like whatever it is for you, and you want their validation, like that's your stuff. And you can actually share that with your partner. Have you ever done that? Probably not. Probably not, right? Because we don't share those kinds of things with our partner, because that would mean we're vulnerable. We're like demanding they're vulnerable with us so we can get to the next level. But we're actually not okay with where we are at. We're in the crucible. So I see too many couples, in my opinion, just like breaking it off. Like, oh, I'm just outgrowing my partner, so we're just going our separate ways. Sometimes that really is the case. But I think more often than not that we're just uncomfortable with the growth, and that we're doing it alone, and the panic of like waiting for our partner. This is actually what creates intimacy. This is actually where the passion comes in. This is where the shared purpose comes in. If you can just be with it, trust it, trust the unfolding. We're always in a rush. This is the thing about the growth path and the spiritual path, is like next level, quantum leap, and it's like, what about this moment is perfect? That's one of the things I learned most from my husband, of course, right? Because, and you might look in your partnership and it's probably the same for you too. I don't know. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. But, if I'm the growth, spiritually oriented person, oftentimes we attract a complementary partner. And there's so many ways that my partner complements me. We have a complementary relationship. And one of the things that he always teaches me is how to be okay with where I am. Because I also, and I wonder how many people can also attest to this, have a tendency of like perfectionism and self-doubt and like, I'm not good enough yet, like in other places in my life. So if you're feeling like this relationship isn't good enough yet, it probably shows up in other areas of your life. And that's your work. That's what this relationship is doing for you. It doesn't mean the relationship's wrong. It actually means that it's right. Right? And learn from your partner. How can you be with this moment right now like it's enough? Because it is. That's the paradox. You are enough. Your partner's enough. Your relationship's enough. Your love is enough. And some people might be like, but then I might be settling. No. You're confusing settling with the weirdness of being okay in the moment. Because we're so growth oriented that the thought of just being with what is has us feeling like there's something wrong. We actually don't know how to be. We say we do because we do like spiritual work. But we're doing the spiritual work to grow, as opposed to being in this, the spiritual work to just be. And I know we talk about just being, and like maybe we can just be sometimes when we're in nature. But can you just be when your relationship is in like a growth phase, those growing pains, where you're leapfrogging? I don't think people know how to do that. And it's not their fault. It's not your fault. I didn't know how to do that. So I've learned how to do that. It doesn't mean sometimes I still freak out. And then I just come back to my biggest commitment is being ravished by life. So if you're a growth or spiritually oriented person, you can probably relate. So if you were really a commitment to being ravished to life, you'd actually turn towards what's happening in your relationship, as opposed to turning away and saying there's something wrong here. When we say something's wrong here, we're turning away. Now again, we get to invite our partner into the up level, but just really notice when you invite them into the up level. If you're doing it from an ultimatum or like there's something wrong over there, that's not the place to make the invite from. Because then there's actually, underneath that, you can feel that there's something wrong. There's a difference between like being anchored in like, this is what I'm stepping into and I'm inviting you into it, and let me know if you're up for it, and I love whatever you choose. And even if they're like, I'm not up for it right now, can you come back in a month, or like whatever, maybe you choose to do that, maybe you don't. I don't, you have to look at like the history and dynamics of your relationship. But generally, when there's enough truth telling on your side, if you let your partner see you in a way that's about you, like in the sense of like, I'm nervous because I'm feeling unsafe, but I know that that's my stuff. Like, they can meet you there versus like, I'm nervous because you're not showing up or, going to the next level with me. Like, it makes it about them, and it's not about them. And this is the thing that we miss, right? So yeah, I am passionate about this because I don't think people talk about this enough, especially in the personal growth and conscious, relating and spiritual communities. Like, they just advocate for, like, basically working with partners who are already, like, really equally yoked, or, like, pretty quick to break it off with a partner. If this is, this kind of growing pains is showing up, or they say just, keep dating and dating, like, don't even bother dating people who don't meet you equally yoked right away, So, like, there's just this whole gap in the industry of, I think, what real relationship can do and provide for us. So let me know what resonates for you. Put it in the comments. If you feel like you are that partner in the relationship who is spiritually oriented, growth oriented, and you are wondering if your love is enough and if you're outgrowing your partner, you're the people I work with. And more often than not, it's not the end of your relationship. It might be the end of one way that you're relating with it. Actually, pretty for sure is. Right? So, this is some deep and rich stuff. I don't know if I transmitted as well as it deserved, but I tried. And it's a lot to cover in a Facebook Live. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. You can PM me if you prefer, or write on this thread. Is more helpful for other folks if you want to be generous like that. And sending you so much love. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend.